Over the Garden Wall. If you know it, then it needs no introduction, and if you don't, well, you're missing out. It holds the title in my head as one of the best animated shows of all time, due mainly to its beautiful art direction, gorgeous music, and complex characters and writing. In fact, I liked it so much that I made a video on it, which to this day is still one of my best, though that's with the caveat that it's got issues. You know, weird audio and delivery as well as a few editing oversights, but chiefly it was that I didn't go into enough detail about certain aspects of the show. As stated earlier, Over the Garden Wall is one of the most densely, thematically packed animated shows in recent history. Each character, set piece and narrative all being components of some kind of greater meaning. So what better way to talk about all this stuff than within the format of an iceberg, because those are still relevant, right? So thank you to Reddit user Fantasy Football for creating this iceberg and giving me a way to gush and elaborate on one of my favourite shows while simultaneously allowing me a way to grow my channel and reach a new audience. So without further ado, let's get started with the first layer. Elijah Wood. This name's gonna immediately be recognisable to most of you if, like me, you grew up watching Lord of the Rings on loop. But if you're young and dumb or just been plain living under a rock, I'll elaborate. Elijah Wood is a 40-year-old American actor, most well known for his role as Frodo Baggins in the Lord of the Rings series. He's also been in other stuff, but most relevant to the subject at hand is his role as Wirt. As for why he chose the role, I'll just let him speak for himself.
And then the artwork, and it was really, honestly, the artwork that kind of drew me in. It evoked, cartoons that we haven't seen in a long time, the idea of something that's hand-painted, 2D cell animation. It was sort of like this idea of taking something from the old world and bringing it into people's living rooms now.
Elijah seemed to have a genuine dedication and appreciation for the artistry of the show and was incredibly dedicated to delivering upon Mikhail's vision. Which is a sentence I included to highlight how great Wood was for the role and also to adequately transition from this topic to the next, which is Mikhail worked on Adventure Time. So I guess this topic requires a bit of introduction for Patrick Mikhail. I'm not going to write his biography, but the brief cliff notes of this man is that he's an American storyboard artist, writer, animator, songwriter, filmmaker, and just the all-in-all jack-of-all-trades creator of Over the Garden Wall. After Mikhail's graduation from Cal Arts and following his departure from Flapjack as a writer and storyboard artist, Mikhail joined with fellow Cal Arts alumni Pendleton Ward, wherein he helped to develop the pilot and series for Adventure Time once it was picked up by Cartoon Network. Mikhail continued working on the series as the show's creative director through season 2. He also did freelance on the show as a songwriter, as well as providing the occasional bit of creative counsel which lasted up until season 5. Tome of the Unknown. This was the project taken up by Mikhail following his departure from Adventure Time, which was mentioned in the last topic. But if you expect these topics to flow into one another like they have been thus far, I've got some bad news for you all because it's not going to happen often. Getting back on topic, however, Tome of the Unknown is a 2013 short film created by Patrick Mikhail and is essentially the pilot for Over the Garden Wall. That being said, Tome of the Unknown differs from Over the Garden Wall in many key aspects significantly. Most notably would be the overarching plot. Tome of the Unknown is about Wirt and Greg seeking to find the pilot's namesake, an ancient town that is said to contain everything that is forgotten, whereas Over the Garden Wall is about the boys trying to find a way home whilst avoiding the evil influence of the beast, which is a complete non-presence in Tome of the Unknown. There's also a few changes in art style and voice actors, such as Beatrice, who in this is voiced by Natasha Leggero and not Melanie Linsky, but it still has voice actors like Elijah Wood and Colin Dean, and the soundtrack is still composed by Blasting Company. Different frog names. Throughout the show, Greg's frog is called many a things, which I will go through now. Kitty, Wirt, Wirt Jr., George Washington, Mr. President, Benjamin Franklin, Dr. Cucumber, Greg Jr., Doktor Skipper, Ronald, and including the comic book series, Jonathan Livingston Applesauce, Private Applesauce, and then finally and conclusively, Jason Funderburker. I think I speak for everyone here when I say my favourite name is Benjamin Franklin, and if you disagree with me then leave your favourite name in the comments and we can all point and laugh at how wrong you are. Okay, that was the first layer, but now like the layers of hell in Dante's Inferno, we're just gonna keep going down and down. So let's check out the second layer now. Episode 9 is Canonical Beginning. Throughout the whole of the series, we are led to believe that the show is set within some old-timey 18th century setting, and that Wirt and Greg were old-timey pilgrim people. Episode 9 is a flashback episode and recontextualizes the entire series by showing that Wirt and Greg's old-timey outfits are actually Halloween costumes, as well as revealing the morbid event and petty build-up to the brothers' arrival to the unknown. Another neat tidbit about this topic before we move on though. According to an audio commentary, during production and editing, this episode was originally intended to be the opening of the series, but was moved to a later point as McHale felt as though the context made the unknown and the story as a whole lack in intrigue and would have been harder for an audience to be invested in. Potatoes and molasses. Unsure if this is simply referring to the song or perhaps something else, but I'm going to be working off the assumption that this is referencing perhaps the most catchy song in Over the Garden Wall soundtrack, which I will not be playing because in my last video the use of this song caused the review to be blocked in North Korea. So enjoy old-timey music to accompany my explanation. Potatoes and Molasses is the 9th song on the soundtrack. It's sung by Greg's voice actor, Colin Dean, and first appeared in the 3rd episode, Schooltown Follies. The song was said to be based off the Shirley Temple song, Animal Crackers in My Soup, which can be seen in its general melody and tune, and was later reprised in a Latin rendition called Potatoes et Molasses, which in contrast to the latter is much more somber and foreboding, being associated with the Beast and his song Come Wayward Souls. But yeah, go listen to the song and the reprise. They're both incredible songs and are synonymous with the series as a whole. Celebrity voices. Most of Over the Garden Wall's mainstream attention was geared towards the voice cast McHale and his team managed to acquire for the series. The most familiar names being the obvious and redundant inclusion of Elijah Wood, and some other people like Christopher Lloyd, John Cleese, Tim Curry, and Chris Isaak. Type your favourite voice actor down in the comments. I know we're going to be getting a lot of Wirt lovers, but in the interest of being contrarian, I'm going with Chris Isaak as Enoch because with the exception of the Beast, he's got probably the most moody and iconic voice for me by far. But if you disagree, leave it in the comments. For Sarah. Those who have watched the show would perhaps remember Wirt making a tape for his crush Sarah, which he ends up accidentally giving to her. What you might not know, however, is that the tape is actually a real piece of merchandise of the show, which was made by Cartoon Network as promotional material in partnership with a company called Mondo. If you have a devout, near cult-like obsession with the show, like I presume most of the show's fanbase does, then you may remember this line.
That tape has got poetry and clarinet on it, Greg.
Yes, sir, this tape features poems wrote by Frodo himself, interspersed with little clarinet solos by the composers of the show's soundtrack, Blasting Company. If you'd like to give this a listen, the whole thing's on YouTube, so follow the link I might leave in the description if you want to hear Wirt wooing you with stanzas upon stanzas of Elijah Wood waxing philosophical for your cassette player. If you're after a physical copy, then I can't help you there, unfortunately. The official site doesn't seem to have a copy and it seems unlikely it will ever be restocked. Even though I don't own a cassette player, it would still be cool to own one of these just as a collectible piece of merchandise for one of my favourite shows. If you can find a copy of one of these, please link it to me. Halloween. Like the runtime of this series, this is going to be short. Over the Garden Wall is seen as the perfect Halloween miniseries, which is why I'm going to regret posting this video in May and why my last one was uploaded on Halloween night. Its moody October aesthetic, presence of evil supernatural forces, foreboding atmosphere, talking pumpkins possessed by walking corpses, and its place in its own timeline all contribute to Over the Garden Wall being the quintessential Halloween miniseries. Also, as mentioned earlier, the show literally takes place on Halloween. Alright, that was the second layer, and if we're going by the metaphor of Inferno I set up in the beginning, we're moving on to gluttony, which is fitting because like a fat guy eating Halloween candy, this layer is stuffed to near death with theories, trivia, and all sorts, so this one is definitely going to be going on for a lot longer. Stick with me, folks. Greg is McHale's son. Not too much to this one. Essentially, in an old interview, Patrick McHale said that Greg's character is loosely based off of his real son. That's about it. American folklore references. Over the Garden Wall, by the admission of the talent working on it, takes heavy design and story influence from classic Americana, seen most notably in the show's reference to pagan and old American folklore, Pottsfield being a reference to an ancient pagan American tradition of Halloween. There are also other notable design influences taken from older pieces of Americana, but I'm not sure they can be classified under folklore, or maybe I'm an idiot and I'm wrong, in which case, McGlowan Brothers board games, illustrations by Gustave Doré, literature by the Brothers Grimm as well as Lewis Carroll, and some Native American influence are all examples of Americana that are referenced and utilised in Over the Garden Wall. I'm aware most of these aren't folklore, but the show is so dense with intertextual references and historical callbacks that it's hard to stay focused on the given topic. Fred belonged to the Highwayman. Within the show, there's no indication of this aside from Fred being hitched outside the tavern. Him belonging to the Highwayman is instead confirmed in the Over the Garden Wall comics. and since I'm not monetized, I don't own a copy of this comic. So I'm gonna admit laziness for this section and read off of the Over the Garden Wall wiki. The highwayman first came across Fred the horse when he robbed a carriage driver on St. Leonard's Bridge, and the horse followed the driver inside the covered bridge. The highwayman threatened Fred into giving him the load he'd been pulling down the river. He also made Fred promise not to tell anyone what he'd seen. Later, after Fred had been forced to tell the judge that the highwayman had stolen his load, Fred returned to St. Leonard's Bridge. Fred felt someone on his back, and it was the highwayman. Since Fred had told the others what happened, the highwayman took Fred as his horse, forcing him to become an outlaw like himself. Beatrice's dog in episode 1. In the opening slideshow, we see a girl, who we later find out is Beatrice, sitting with a dog in the woods. And in that same episode, when Wirt and Greg come across a dog-shaped beast, it becomes the one we see in the opening. And wouldn't you know it, we see that same dog in the ending montage. The old mill belongs to Beatrice's family. We see the old mill several times throughout the show. When the woodsman brings Wirt and Greg to the mill, he says that he found it abandoned and repurposed it upon finding it empty. The mill is decorated with several things resembling bluebirds, and Beatrice herself was nearby the mill during the episode, as are Beatrice's family, as revealed in the penultimate episode. The ending confirms that Beatrice and her family resided there following the ending, but the clues I pointed out heavily support the interpretation that the mill belongs to the Beatrice family. Alright, no beating around the bush now. Fourth layer, Wirt's costume. Wirt's costume is intentionally made to not really be based off anything particularly, as an indication of his character that he's someone who is unsure of himself and drenched in insecurity. Metaphor aside, Wirt's costume is a basic jean and shirts combo with some suspenders for that old-timey pilgrim people look. The hat is just a Santa hat with the white stuff cut off, and he also wears the jacket used by one of Wirt's ancestors that fought in the Civil War. Also, it's made to resemble the poet Dante Alighieri, but we'll talk more about that later. Turtles are made from Edelwood tree oil. This isn't so much trivia and is more of a theory. It is definitely apparent that there is a connection between the Beast, Anti-Whispers, Edelwood trees, and the black turtles we see throughout the series. The Beast needs Edelwood oil in order to stay alive, as is revealed in the finale. We also see that these turtles have the ability to give animals qualities of the Beast. It is heavily implied that Adelaide works for the Beast, so it can be theorized for a few clues that her sister, Anti-Whispers, also works for the Beast, due to her association and relation with Adelaide, and the fact that her house is infested with the things like cockroaches and my mother's prized cheesecake. Personally, I feel like this theory is sort of stretching and taking certain ideas too far. I think it's definitely correct to say that the turtles are associated with the Beast, and I believe it's also true that Adelaide is in league with the Beast. However, I do not believe that Anti-Whispers is working with the Beast or Adelaide. The show makes clear that the sisters do not have much of a relationship. And I always saw the turtles as extensions of the Beast, his way of having eyes and ears in all places. I never saw them as literal personifications of Edelwood, but that's just my input. Over the Garden Wall takes place in New England. I'm a broken record at this point, but here's the usual spiel. Over the Garden Wall is based off old Americana and Pilgrim times, and if there's any area in America that exemplifies this period, it's New England. And there's probably some video out there of Mikhail saying that the state was a design influence, but yeah, New England is probably what the unknown most closely resembled. Dante's Inferno parallels. This one's hella dense and probably the most interesting topic in this layer and the series as a whole, so buckle yourself in as I try and explain this. Dante's Inferno is a 16th century poem by Dante Alighieri, the story of which has become a huge influence on the public's perception of the afterlife as well as Christian theology as a whole. It's about Dante Alighieri waking up in a strange wood and tries to escape by descending down the 9 layers of hell with his guide Virgil, so that he can return to his lost love Beatrice. Immediately, based off that admittedly lame description, you could probably already see some parallels. Poet lost in the woods, a guide, and a mention of a Beatrice. Character roles are shifted around, as is the plot, but fundamentally the skeleton of the Inferno is present. For example, the show's 10 episodes are meant to mimic the journey through the 9 layers of hell. The first episode being the introduction, and every episode afterwards resembling one of the layers. Second being limbo, third being lust, fourth is gluttony, you get the idea. Greed, anger and sorrow, heresy, violence, fraud, and treachery. If you're looking for a more detailed overview of how these episodes fit into these layers, then watch my other Over the Garden Wall video as I go into more detail there. Jesus Christ, that felt long. I'm only halfway through the iceberg, so stick with me now. The unknown is purgatory. Over the Garden Wall is most commonly interpreted to be a story about death. What causes debate though is what the unknown is meant to represent within this overarching theme. Is it hell, a dream, or something else entirely? I say this, but the consensus is that the unknown is purgatory. According to Wikipedia, the definition of purgatory is the state of those who die in God's friendship, assured of their eternal salvation, but who still have need of purification to enter the happiness of heaven. There isn't exactly a presence of a clear God in the unknown to be in favour with, unless you want to count the Queen of the Clouds. But the idea of waiting in an in-between space until your soul can be purified is something that can definitely be applied to Over the Garden Wall. As is established in episode 9, Wirt and Greg are in between life and death, existing within a space where they must fight for the salvation of their souls. And Wirt and Greg do become better people in the unknown. Wirt gains more confidence and loses his pride and contempt towards Greg. Greg learns accountability and responsibility. Their souls are purified if you subscribe to this theory. And I for one do. There's obviously more to this, but for the sake of my own sanity, I'm keeping this one short. Check out my Over the Garden Wall video if you want more explanation. Original concept. The original story concept for Over the Garden Wall was going to be centered around the train we see in episode 9. The train was another allegory for life and death. Wirt and Greg spend the entire miniseries trying to get home, while also trying to escape this train, knowing that the train is attempting to deliver them to death. In this concept, the Beast would actually be the train conductor, who spends the series trying to hunt down Wirt and Greg and get them back on the train. In the end, the conductor gets Wirt and Greg back onto the train, but it is revealed that the train was taking them back to life, not their deaths. Jesus fucking Christ, I said trains so goddamn much. This concept probably wasn't used as Cartoon Network might have thought it was too dark for the channel and wouldn't have had much appeal to the young viewers. The tavern guests or toys come to life. I think this theory was made by the original Iceberg creator himself, and he's made an explanation of this, so for this part I'll essentially be paraphrasing his words. The theory goes that the epilogue reveals that the toys put on display are actually the original form of the people in the tavern, which explains why they're all obsessed with simplistic labels like the butcher, the tailor, the baker, and the tavern keeper. Because toys have simplistic labels. This obsession and desire to conform with their labels is what keeps them confined to the unknown. This is actually a pretty good theory. It doesn't rely on stretching evidence to the point where it almost snaps in half under its own convoluted theorizing. It completely makes sense and isn't at all out of place with what we know about the unknown. And I for one really like this interpretation of the tavern patrons. Edelwood trees are dead children. Gonna be lightning rounding a few of these, starting with this one. It's heavily alluded to throughout the show by characters such as the Woodsman and the Beast, that all the Edelwood trees are the lost souls of other children in the unknown that have been taken by the Beast. Are children the lost souls the Beast is referring to? End of the day, we'll never know, but it's up to interpretation. Anti-Whispers created turtles. Couldn't find much on this, so my input is limited to saying that this theory stems from and is referring to the fact that Auntie Whisper's house is full of black turtles, which are presumably her own creation. Again, couldn't find much on this. If you have knowledge, please leave it in the comments. Endicott died in Wirt's hometown. In episode 9, when Wirt and Greg are in the cemetery, there's a headstone visible that reads the name Quincy Endicott, same name as the eccentric and wealthy man living in the unknown. This can either be read as an Easter egg, or if you're like me, it's further proof that the unknown represents some kind of afterlife. Okay, we got 3 layers left now, and they're not gonna get any less easy to answer. Everyone has a torch to burn. If any of you have watched the show, then you recognise this as being one of the most noteworthy quotes from the Woodsman. When you take into account the unknown as purgatory concept, this can be interpreted as everyone has their cross or burden to bear. Or more simply, everyone has that one aspect of life that they're still holding on to so they can't pass on. For the Woodsman, it was his daughter. For Miss Langtry, it was the loss of her husband. For Auntie Whispers, it was the fear that Lorna would abandon her after not needing her anymore. Gives a lot of new meaning to this quote when you take all that into account. The Beast is a Wendigo. Some of you may be scratching your heads and wondering what the hell a Wendigo is, so allow me to elaborate. A Wendigo is a mythological creature belonging to Native American folklore, which is often depicted as a werewolf type of creature with large antlers protruding from its head. Primarily a trait of the Wendigo is its desire for human flesh as part of its insatiable hunger. They're also known to manipulate and control people to fill its own needs, and are referred to as malevolent creatures that are made of pure darkness. Compare all that to the Beast and the similarities are pretty apparent. A beast that feeds off the suffering of others, a more kid-friendly version, but check. Manipulates others into helping it satiate its needs, check. Big fuck-off antlers, check. Being of pure darkness, motherfucker, did I stutter? I mean, it definitely fits with Over the Garden Wall's reinterpretation of old American folklore, so yeah. I think the Wendigo was definitely an influence on the Beast. Pottsfield is a burial ground. The name of the town Pottsfield is actually a shortened version of the term Potter's Field, which is, according to Wikipedia, a place for the burial of unknown, unclaimed, or indigent people. If you take the unknown is purgatory theory into account, then you could probably make a connection between the residents of Pottsfield that exist within a state of life and death, and the unknown that sits in that same place. Also, Wirt and Greg literally dig up the graves of corpses, so it's safe to assume that this theory is correct. Winged skulls. Winged skulls are present throughout the series. We can see them in the banner for episode titles as well as on the graves in Wirt and Greg's hometown. Winged skulls were common to put on gravestones in New England, as they were originally used as 17th century grave markers. But winged skulls are symbols that represent the spiritual rebirth that one experiences in death. Since we see these symbols so often throughout the series, even on each episode title, it can be taken as Wirt and Greg going on a spiritual journey through death throughout the series in the unknown. Okay, 2 more layers left. Everyone in the unknown is dead. I'm a broken record on an old-timey phonograph right now, because once again I'm bringing up purgatory, and get used to it because it's going to be brought up a few more times. If the unknown is purgatory, or just the afterlife in general, it's safe to assume that everyone who inhabits it is dead. Endicott's Grave in episode 9 also supports this, as well as songs like Come Wayward Souls. The epilogue is heaven. I think I've referenced this theory before, and it's pretty dark if you do interpret it to be canon. You know how in the final episode where Wirt and Greg strengthen their relationship as brothers by admitting and growing from their flaws, emerging from that pond better people and with a new lease on life? Yeah, forget that, they're dead. Which, I mean, it's heaven. You can't exactly say that's a bad place to end up, but it's still a little morbid to think that they drowned in that lake. Rest in peace, Wirt and Greg, I guess. The beast's true form. Couldn't find much information as to what the beast's true form is meant to resemble, but if you don't remember what he looks like, this is it. My personal theory is that it's the personification of all lost souls taken by the beast, all accumulated into one being made to represent the worst and most flawed parts of whomever he's absorbed. The beast is a parasite who steals, manipulates, and corrupts whoever he can, and I believe this appearance is meant to resemble that. Alright, we in the endgame now. Final layer. Let's not beat around the bush. Gloves off. Let's get this done. The beast is Satan. I feel like I've talked enough about the beast's duplicitous nature and how much of a malicious force he is, that the point of him being an analogue for the devil feels like I'm kicking the dead horse. But yeah, the beast is meant to be a metaphor for the devil within the unknown. He's deceitful, manipulative, a parasite, and he's literally a being of pure darkness. The subtext couldn't be any more apparent. With that being said, I'm going to end this iceberg on an anticlimax. I hope you all enjoyed my commentary, and again, a big thanks to Fantasy Football for helping me with this iceberg and for, you know, making it in the first place. This was actually really fun to do and had me thinking more about a show I love with almost every topic being interesting, unlike a certain cyborg constable. If you are new to my channel, then I recommend subscribing and keeping up to date with my content. I've got a lot I want to prove and a lot I want to do, and it would be great to have new people with me to watch and support me while I continue to grow. And also leave a comment if you have any corrections or things you want to add to the conversation. Every comment I get, good or bad, is more and more motivation and reassurance that I'm not talking to the brick wall, so those are greatly appreciated. Usual social shilling. Discord, Twitter. See ya.